Hello, and welcome to the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast, where we explore the latest in life extension and anti-aging science with a dive into a month's worth of insights and new breakthroughs. This podcast is a combined effort of the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, which operates Lifespan.io, and Future Grind, a podcast that explores the ethics and implications of emerging science and technology. I'm Ryan O'Shea, and I'll be your host. It's now December. The holidays are here, and 2018 is wrapping up. It's a busy time of year, and that goes for rejuvenation science as well. Remember, to find out more about any of these topics, you can visit lifespan.io/roundup. We'll start things off with a fun one. Leaf president Keith Comito was recently featured on the Young Turks, a popular news and commentary YouTube channel with a viewership of over 4 million people. During his chat with host Cenk Uygur, Keith discussed the science of healthy life extension and Lifespan.io's mission to crowdfund the cure for aging. The full interview is 14 minutes long, but here's a brief clip.
So I'm in favor of living longer. I like life. And it's a fairly logical thing to want to extend it. It seems like that would be one of the most important things you could do because you either exist or you don't. I figured that out. Before we get into how you can do that, which is the really interesting and trippy part, why do crowdfunding? Are there people working on this already?
Sure. It's basically because for a long time, up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, if you were, a suit and tie researcher saying that you wanted to work on the root causes of aging, you would have been laughed at. And it's only very recently that there's been a paradigm shift in the industry where, researchers are realizing that there's actually something that we can do here, that you can, even though the pathologies of aging are myriad, the things that actually go wrong with you, the damages that you accumulate are relatively few. And that's a point for intervention, and that something can be done here. So we're trying to catalyze that because the government hasn't quite caught up to that yet. Researchers are kind of getting there. So we're basically trying to emulate what the early cancer advocates did in the 1940s, where if you remember the Jimmy Fund, they came up with the early form of chemotherapy, then did essentially PR maneuvers like the Jimmy Fund to get the public on board and really get everyone to care about this important issue. And they eventually kind of turned that into sort of political action. They took out these full-page spreads in the New York Times and the Washington Post that was basically like Nixon, like, what the heck are you doing? Get on this. And it was a really instructive 1, 2, 3 model. So we're basically trying to follow that. We're in step 2 now. We have interesting research that's bearing interesting results. Now we're sort of catalyzing that movement of people to care about it, which is now in turn helping to wake up investors and governments and even international organizations like the World Health Organization.
Well, you guys are literally looking for the fountain of youth. I believe we've done that a couple of times. But in this case, you're actually looking in the right place. It turns out it's not in Florida, and it's not in ancient lands. It's in science. It's in our own bodies, and all we have to do is study it. And so I want people to think about it this way, because it's as important as any topic you could imagine, because if you had a chance to extend your kids' lives by 20 years, would you do it?
To see the full video, you can head on over to lifespan.io/roundup. Our NAD Mouse Project campaign came to a conclusion in early November, and thanks to our generous supporters, it was an amazing success. The donation meter reached far beyond the initial goal of $30,000, past the 3 stretch goals to hit an incredible total of over $75,000. Thank you to everyone who helped make this possible. Dr. David Sinclair shares these sentiments, saying, "We are both humbled and so very grateful for the generous support of the NAD Mouse Project. As the excitement and potential of the NAD longevity field continues to grow, we can't wait to see what we learn and report to our supporters about what NMN can do." The 4th Euro Symposium on Healthy Aging, a biannual event organized in Brussels by the Healthy Life Extension Society, took place from November 8th to November 10th. The conference featured a number of interesting talks by leading scientists on the topics of cell senescence and DNA repair, but also panels and talks about advocacy and the social issues tied to rejuvenation. Among the speakers were Leaf's own Elena Milova and Nikola Bagala. The symposium was an absolute success, and we used the opportunity to interview some of the biggest names in longevity science. Some interviews, including one with Dr. Marco Demaria of the European Research Institute for the Biology of Aging, are already out, and others will be published over the next few weeks. Here's a clip discussing the conference.
My name is João Pedro Magalhães from the University of Liverpool, and it's been a very exciting conference here in Brussels with lots of insightful talks and discussions. My own talk focused on genes, drugs, and databases for healthy aging, and I described some of our database on genes associated with aging, genes associated with cell senescence, and also compounds and drugs that extend lifespan in animals. And then I discussed some of our network pharmacology and machine learning approaches to identify and prioritize compounds for life-extending effects, which we then tested in worms. And lastly, I also discussed some of the caveats and limitations of translating findings from model systems into humans, such as the long validation times in aging and differences in biology between mice and humans. Having said that, it's still a very exciting time for research on aging, and there's a lot of possible avenues that could result in advances in improving human health and life.
In November, we came up with a couple of thought experiments about rejuvenation biotechnology that we welcome you to think about as well. In the first one, imagine that you're given a chance to choose whether or not to be born, knowing what life is like and that it could be good or bad. Would you choose to be born? And how does this relate to questions of rejuvenation? In thought experiment number 2, imagine what life would be like in a parallel universe in which human aging never existed. Think about these questions, and when you're ready to read more, visit lifespan.io/roundup. The second installment of the Undoing Aging Conference is coming up in March, and the list of amazing speakers keeps growing. We spoke with Aubrey de Grey to find out more about the conference and who will be attending.
So yes, we're absolutely delighted to be able to do this conference again. Of course, the conference is being sponsored by our German donors, Michael Graver and his Forever Healthy Foundation, and I'm delighted to say that he was happy enough about how things went last March that he's decided he's going to fund it every year going forward. So the new conference will be at the end of March. The dates are March the 28th to 30th, again in Berlin, exactly in the same building, the same venue as last time. But a lot of things will not be the same. In particular, we will probably have only 2 or 3 speakers who spoke last time. This is the same that I used to do when I ran conferences in Cambridge a decade ago, that because the range of technologies within SENS is so broad, there is always a huge amount of choice of really high-quality scientists to invite. And this time, we're doing the conferences every year, whereas in Cambridge it was every 2 years. But the length of the conference is not the same. The Berlin conferences are only 2.5 days, whereas it was 3.5 days in Cambridge. So, yes, there will be lots of different speakers. We will again have some speakers who are working very closely with us. For example, we'll have Judy Campisi and also Julie Anderson. Those are both very senior and brilliant professors at the Buck Institute, and we are, in both cases, funding projects in their labs, which they will be discussing. We'll have all of the usual topics covered, all of the strands of science, as well as the things that are kind of enabling technologies. For example, one other speaker we will have is Ruby Chensai, who is the chief scientist at Applied Stem Cell. That's a company in the Bay Area which is working with us to develop a new kind of gene therapy that will be much more effective than anything that exists today. And of course, gene therapy is a technology that we need to be really good in order to deliver a number of the things that are needed for science. On top of all that, of course, we will have poster sessions just as normal in the evenings with free alcohol, the usual thing that we've always done. So I'm enormously looking forward to it. These are These are my parties, these conferences. I absolutely love doing them, bringing all my friends and colleagues and people that I hugely admire and respect together, as well as, of course, everyone in this movement, whether scientists or non-scientists. It's an enormously friendly and supportive community. It's the right place to learn more, and it's also the right place to meet people who just feel the same, that aging is quite a bad thing.
Speaking of Aubrey de Grey, the SENS Research Foundation is running its traditional winter fundraiser, which is set to end on December 31st. The fundraiser's goal is $500,000, and the meter currently stands at just over $183,000, in no small part thanks to Jim Mellon's generous donation of $100,000. Jim Mellon is also the one behind the Longevity Forum, which was held in London on November 5th. The event brought together leaders in rejuvenation research and investment, such as President of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, Eric Verdin, and Ajax Therapeutics CEO Mike West. As stated on its website, the forum aims to explore and establish new ways of addressing opportunities and issues related to longevity by displaying proof of concept. To find out more about this event, visit lifespan.io/roundup. Also on lifespan.io is a recap of the International Society on Aging and Disease's 3rd International Conference in France, as well as a recap of RADFest. And now for our research roundup. A paper by scientists from the University of Salford suggests that known antibiotic drugs, azithromycin and roxithromycin, may have senolytic effects, being able to target senescent human fibroblasts. The study was conducted in cell cultures, but it's too early to say whether the same effects observed in vitro will translate to animals or people. Senolytic Therapeutics is one of many biotech startups working to effectively remove senescent cells from the body. Their approach has been likened to smart bombs in that, while the chemotherapeutic load of the drug is capable of killing any cell that it's delivered to, it is encapsulated within a nanotube that can only be unlocked by senescent cells. A new therapy known as AMBAR has been shown to significantly slow down the progression of Alzheimer's during a phase 3 clinical trial. AMBAR uses ambulin to remove beta amyloid from the brain. While it's not a cure for Alzheimer's, it is a significant step forward, and it should become commercially available following FDA registration within the next few years. It turns out that longevity isn't all about genetics. A paper published in early November suggests that the genetic contribution to human longevity, traditionally estimated up to 30%, is even lower than that, under 10%. A few different studies have shown promise for caloric restriction, and now there may be another. A study on fruit flies by Buck Institute scientists shows that expression of a gene that facilitates cell proliferation is reduced much more slowly in calorie-restricted fruit flies than those fed a more caloric diet. The lack of this gene results in loss of cells in the gut and ultimately in what is referred to as leaky gut, a state of increased permeability thought to contribute to age-related chronic inflammation. In the study, the calorie-restricted flies exhibited a less leaky gut as well as a slowdown of age-related changes. Keck Graduate Institute scientists have developed a system called ClickAchip, which is a palm-sized testing system capable of measuring changes in blood proteins associated with aging, thereby assessing the decline in tissue health and functionality. The new system promises to be much faster and cheaper than traditional ones. A study in the journal Science Translational Medicine shows that increasing levels of the bacterium Akkermansia muciniphila helps reduce insulin resistance in both mice and monkeys. Mounting evidence suggests that this type of bacteria plays a role in the prevention of age-related conditions such as cancer and type 2 diabetes. According to the study, older monkeys showed decreased levels of the bacterium, which results in lower levels of a protective molecule and contributes to the thinning of the animal's intestinal walls. The scientists think that ways to increase levels of the bacterium in the human gut might be a viable therapeutic avenue for the prevention of several age-related conditions. A small-scale study recently showed that the levels of NAD in human plasma tend to decrease with age, though it remains to be seen whether this happens because of an increased consumption or a decreased production of the molecule. A new article on Neolife explains the potential benefits of sequencing the genome of pets, not just for pets themselves, but also for us humans. Remember, to find out more about any of the topics in our research roundup, you can visit lifespan.io/roundup. That's it for this episode of the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and post about it on social media. This will increase our reach and introduce more people to the importance of life extension science. Don't forget, you can get additional deep dives into science, technology, and futurism on the Future Grind podcast. Find out more at futuregrind.org. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan O'Shea, and on behalf of the team at Leaf, we wanted to thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next time on the Rejuvenation Roundup podcast.